Hey everyone, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to talk about the meaning of the sun in Virgo. Now, this is something that I've talked about a few previous videos, but it feels worth mentioning, especially because I'm about to do a video of Mercury doing my planets in profile series. I figure I'd do Mercury and Virgo next. And in order to, I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about the sign of Virgo in general before talking about any of the planets in the sign of Virgo. Well, any sign this goes for. So, if you have an understanding of Leo on a very deep level, it's a lot easier to understand planets in Leo. So same thing goes across the board. All right, so let's take a look right now at, I just want to show you a visual really quick and explain something. So here is the real-time clock, and you can see that we're about the third day of Virgo season. Happens toward the end of August. Got Mercury in Virgo right now as well. So got these two together. Mercury is about to make its first appearance as an evening star, is in its own sign, is in its own domicile. We could currently say it's seated on its chariot. It's a pretty potent Mercury, and it's about to get even stronger in the next few days as things really kind of light up as Mercury appears. I'm going to be talking about Mercury's appearance in a separate video, as well as Mercury and Virgo in a separate video. So I'm doing a lot on Virgo this week. Today, I just want you to get to know Virgo in general. Now, here's something interesting that not everybody knows, which is that the sign of Virgo and the sign of Gemini, the two temples of Mercury Hermes, there's a masculine temple and there's a feminine temple, or kind of, you could call it a yin and a yang. These two domains of Mercury come at two very particular times of the year. One of them comes just as we're turning from the light half of the year, and that's Gemini. We're turning from the light half of the year into the dark half of the light half of the year. I'll explain what that means in a second. And then in Virgo, we're moving from the dark half of the light half of the year into the beginning of the darkest part of the year. So there's four basic quadrants, you could say. I'm just going to put them here on the screen. I'll just kind of like text them out for you. So imagine that you have, first of all, in spring, right? We'll say spring equals the light of the light. And the reason for this is that you have the light rising in the solar year, the 24-hour day. There is now more daytime than there is nighttime. That means that light is generally now conquering darkness, and so that springtime season of Aries, Taurus, and Gemini represents the light of the light. Light is rising and the light half of the year has taken over. Then you go to summer and you're getting into the dark of the light. And why is this? Because from Cancer onward, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, it's still the light half of the year, but now the light is waning from the summer solstice onward. So you have the yin of the yang. Then you have the third quadrant, which is going to be autumn. And that is going to be the dark of the dark. In there you have the darkness taking over. The dark half of the year is now taken over at the autumn equinox of Libra. So you got Libra, Scorpio, Sag, and the darkness is increasing. So you got dark half of the year, darkness increasing on the dark side of the year. So that's dark of the dark. Then you finally have winter, which is the light of the dark. Now, people think that that's kind of weird. Shouldn't summer be the light of the light, and shouldn't winter be the dark of the dark? But actually, no, what defines winter is that it's on the dark half of the year, but that the light is rising. That is Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And summer, same thing. Yeah, it's the summertime, but the dark is starting to take over. So though that's the alternation of light and dark that the solar year displays in terms of the four seasonal quadrants. More important than what the weather is like is this alternation of light and dark, which is archetypal and as kind of the most foundational element of the zodiac. So this is something I talk about in my training programs, shameless self-promotion. The next one starts in November, and I'll be sure to tell you about it more at the end. So now, let's talk about Virgo from this standpoint. Gemini is the transitional point. Gemini is called a double-bodied sign. This is Mercury's masculine temple that takes place as the alternation is happening between the rising of light on the light half of the year and the beginning of dark on the light half of the year. And that transition swivels around the Gemini point. And that happens, from, say, late May through late June up to the summer solstice. That period is ruled by Mercury. Why? Like, why would Mercury be associated with that particular transitional stage? Because this is one of 2 times in the year where light is handing over to dark. The first one happens around the summer solstice. From late May all the way to the summer solstice, we're in the transitional stage where light will hand over to dark on the light half of the year. And then in Virgo, it happens again. In Virgo, we have the light half of the year handing over to the dark half of the year, which begins at 0 Libra on the fall equinox. That in that period of time, the totality of the light half of the year, you could say, is handing over to the dark, whereas Gemini represents a kind of more, a meta transition within the light half of the year. So Virgo has to do with this more major transitional period of light into dark. This is really, really important. Why would Mercury be associated with light handing over to dark? Is there something about Mercury that just loves darkness? Well, if we moralize about darkness, if we make darkness the equivalent of bad or evil or something like that, or unfavorable, then it would certainly seem that Mercury's got, a tough position to be in, or somehow the astrologers were like hating on Mercury. But that's not how ancient astrologers thought about darkness. Darkness was not the equivalent of evil or bad, or it could have its negative connotations. Darkness could mean ignorance. Darkness could mean forgetting or sleeping, or, in the yoga philosophy, tamas, the mode of ignorance, like people being obsessed with, things that are frivolous and that don't really matter. Okay, so that's one possibility. But more broadly speaking, darkness, like in the natural alternation of light and dark in the 24-hour day, it brings a transition that is much more holistic. First of all, it destabilizes the coming of darkness, and Mercury destabilized the light. Well, what is light? Well, on one hand, light is certainty. So if you think about it, I'm certain of this. Mercury comes in and says, but are you really? On the other hand, you could say that light is confidence. Mercury is doubt. Mercury is concern. If you have an intention, I'm going to do this. This is my ambition. This is my purpose. Mercury comes in and says, are you sure you still want to do this? Could there be something else? You call something into question. So Mercury, in a sense, is the ruler of divine, meaningful chaos, the kind that comes in and redirects your sense of certainty, confidence, assuredness, ambition, purpose. But Mercury is the psychopomp, the guide of souls. And so Mercury's challenge to our certainty or challenge to our ambition is meaningful. It's a meaningful diversion. Just like Mercury retrogrades often, will delay something, or Mercury retrogrades will have us doing some kind of reversal, or something that we thought was really solid suddenly becomes it's called into question. But they're like meaningful diversions. They're meaningful digressions. They take us off course, but it ends up being just exactly the thing we needed. Okay, so that's Mercury. Mercury is like that. Mercury takes us on diversionary courses. That's not always a bad thing, because it turns out that the sun, and if you think about the sun and light is not always a good thing. How many times have we gone down a path in life full of the light of our own confidence, but we only to find out that it was kind of a foolhardy arrogance, or only to find out that we didn't know what we thought we knew, or only to find out that we weren't going where we thought we were going. So light and dark have always this dance that they're doing with each other. This is why surrender is such an important part of most spiritual traditions, because we realize you can't live by light alone. We're walking in the darkness. And you have to acknowledge that you're walking in the darkness in order to find guidance. That navigator, Mercury, Hermes, that guides you off the wrong path and onto the right path, or sometimes off the right path and onto the wrong path, but always in a meaningful way. So the disintegration of light that Mercury represents at both Virgo and Gemini has to do with, in a sense, a very broad set of archetypal themes that have to do with the transition from light into dark, from yang into yin, or from certainty into divine chaos, or something like that. Okay, so we do a whole separate analysis of Gemini, which is interesting. But for now, let's just talk about Virgo and what Virgo represents. One thing that is important to remember about Virgo and Gemini, and you can do the opposite, by the way, around the Jupiter signs, Sagittarius and Pisces, where light is coming back. And that's a really interesting way of talking about what Jupiter represents, but more on that another time. Now, all of these signs, though, that represent the transitions from light to dark in all 4 cardinal turning points, these are the transitional signs that lead to those cardinal turning points. Those signs are called double-bodied, which Robert Schmidt translated and talked about. He's one of the chief modern translators of ancient astrological texts, and he was just a wizard when it came to Greek and Greek philosophy and so forth. And one of the things he said is it really that what it's pointing to is that the sign is of 2 natures. So, and what he means of 2 natures is not primarily psychological. So it's not like, oh, you're a Gemini, so you must be two-faced, right? Or you're a Virgo, so you must alternate between, being very pure and very naughty or something like that, these stereotypes or whatever. But really, to be of 2 natures means to carry and hold 2 different, like, temporal archetypes. And in this case, what we're looking at is light versus dark. So, Hermes, interestingly, the ruler of these 2 signs, could transition between both the diurnal and the nocturnal sects, the 2 different ways that you could divide a chart based on whether you were born during the daytime or during the nighttime, were according to these 2 different groups of planets. And Mercury was a fluid planet that could be either daytime or nighttime, either masculine or feminine in its expression, either sort of yin or yang. The double-bodied signs, and Jupiter plays into this too. Again, I can't cover Jupiter and Sag and Pisces today, but the important thing to note is that the double-bodied signs mean of 2 natures, and they embody these transitional points between light and dark. And so they carry this really nuanced, deep interconnecting of light and dark during these very meta moments in the solar year. And that's why these signs often get misunderstood. And I feel like the mutable signs maybe get the most, like, stereotyping done. You know what I mean? Like, when you hear people talk about Gemini, you don't hear them talk about Gemini with a lot of depth. The most you get is usually like, well, you might be really good with words. You might be quite clever, and like you could do multiple. You might be like a jack of all trades or something like that. And similar Virgo. Oh, you must be so meticulous. You're like, well, could I be something a little deeper? Like, it's so fun when we talk about, some of the other signs that seem to have so much depth to them. When we get to poor Virgo, it's just like, well, you're organized and picky or something like that. So, but the dual nature of Virgo in particular, let's talk about that now, the double-bodied nature of Virgo. So on the one hand, you have Virgo as representing something of the light, of the solar sunny half of the year, or you could say the yang dominant side of the year. And in that sense, Virgo is weirdly almost like Mars-like. In fact, Virgo has an antitia, which is kind of a secretive form of conjunction with Aries, the sign of Aries, which is a kind of aspect that ancient astrologers considered. You can see this in the constellation image of the Virgin, who has oftentimes is depicted with a bird on her shoulder or on her finger, or with wings. Sometimes she'll have wings in the artwork as well. What this is really pointing to is the fact that there is like a secret fire in Virgo. And you can sometimes hear people associate Virgo with the Vestal Virgins and things like that. But and what is it that virginity has that is likened unto that sacred fire? It's a purity. What does fire do? It purifies, it burns off impurities. And there's something about that that's very yang and very light and sort of eternal and youthful. Aries and Virgo are also the 2 signs that many modern depth psychologists have associated with the puer, which is like Peter Pan for girls or boys, right? Or you could say just the archetype of the eternal youth. So there's something like young and vibrant and pure and clean and often very purifying about Virgo energy in general. But then on the other hand, there is this very sacred, destructive anxiety and tension within Virgo. And that's the dark side of Virgo that's also there. In fact, Ptolemy said that the first 15 degrees of a double-bodied sign was like the sign before it, and the second 15 degrees was like the sign after it. In this case, then you would say a fixed sign versus a cardinal sign. So that's another double-bodied part of Virgo that we'll visit in a minute. But anyway, the dark side of Virgo comes in with the sign that's in front of it, Libra, which rules the autumn equinox. And what is the autumn equinox? Is when the darkness takes over, and that sign is ruled by the scales that represent judgment and the moment of harvesting. Now, in the solar year, of course, you'll hear astrologers say this all the time, that Virgo represents the sacred anxiety that, people who work the land must have in order to, have a good harvest. You have to be really attentive. My grandfather was somewhat of a farmer, and just being around that a little bit in my youth, and some of you out there probably live, you know a lot more about it than I do, but there is a sense of like, your livelihood is staked on how well your crops do. There's a kind of sacred anxiety that comes in, an attentiveness, a concern about the approaching harvest that kicks in. And that happens, closer to the harvest time of year, you could say. Well, that is an existential anxiety for Virgo as well. It's not just like an agricultural metaphor. It's also a concern about what happens when we die. Have I lived a pure life? And if I haven't lived a pure life, if I haven't made the grade, if I don't pass the exam, then what happens to me? How will I be judged? What consequences will come? How will I reap what I've sown? How will I reap what I've sown? So that sacred anxiety about the eventual approaching, upcoming entrance of the soul into the underworld, of death, of decay, of breakdown, Virgo carries that very acutely. And it's part of why there is also this, oftentimes this really, whoops, oh, my phone's going off. Hold on. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. Let me turn this off. Okay. So it's also a part of there's sort of a sacred anxiety that's built into Virgo. Virgo saying like, I know that there's this judgment that's approaching, and the way that I live my life is reflective of the fact that I know that there is a measuring stick coming at the end of this process, and it's going to evaluate me. And one of the things that Virgo is often working on is how the measuring stick is defined. For example, is the measuring stick based on vanity? Is it based on superficials? Like how much do I weigh on the scale? That can be, a terrible one. So where does that element of criticism come from with Virgo? We always talk about Virgo, critical, picky, fussy, whatever. No, it's Virgo is concerned. And the concern is with the fact that our results are measured in this world. There is a karmic reality where we reap what we sow. And to the extent that we can be in control of that or be attentive to that, we tend to get better results. And so there can be a kind of anal retentiveness or being overly concerned about, what we're doing or whether it's perfect or not. Virgo is really, on a spiritual level, you could say Virgo is the one that reminds us that, there's not a hair that moves in creation without the intelligence of the divine witnessing, permeating, moving through all things. Virgo is sometimes hyper aware of that sort of super presence that observes, that witnesses, and that modulates everything and delivers results. Remember, Hermes, the ruler of Virgo, is the planetary ruler of astrology. And so, what is astrology? Well, astrology is a study of karma. It's a study of the laws of karma, the laws of, spiritual cause and effect. And so there's a great deal of anxiety and concern that Virgo has that is truly about a heightened awareness of karma and its reality in the world. But it can get, it can get out of control. It's like, well, I'm going to be damned unless I'm perfect, or something like that. And that would be when the dark side of Virgo sort of takes over a little bit more. And the light side of Virgo, you could say, can be the one that just remains innocent, in a sense. That the more that we know about karma and the more that we're aware that the results matter, that sometimes the more we try to control things. And in a sense, remaining innocent and remaining sort of good without intentionality or hyper awareness is better for us than manipulating all of this stuff. In fact, for me as an astrologer, I have to step away from astrology like pretty regularly. I don't look at my chart that often anymore. I prefer looking and studying at other people's charts than my own, not because I'm not doing, my own internal work, but because I find that it's dangerous if you look at your own chart too much, that astrology goes from being a way of spiritually reflecting upon the world and experience and into an attempt to try to be perfect or try to control things. And you become hyper aware and sort of fussing over things to a level that's really not healthy. Well, that's Mercury's territory. That's sort of and that you could say that that's a little bit of Virgo's territory as well. Now, on the other hand, the light side of Virgo can also be the one that, it's like an 18-year-old farm girl, right? Who's never seen the world and who's never lost her virginity and who's always concerned about being the valedictorian and who's never, you know what I mean? Like, and this could be not just a girl, but like anyone, obviously, but I'm just giving an image in my head of like the sort of, the dutiful, pure, innocent youth that may also shun or like keep away the demons of knowledge or of experience or of it's hard to experience grace until you fall. And so there has to be a willingness on the light half of Virgo to also fall from one's platform of purity. And that's often this really intimate part of the Virgoan experience, is to fall from a platform of purity only to discover that, such falls tend to deepen and enrich our spiritual connection with our source, not stain it. Maybe sometimes we feel like it's getting stained, and there is a sense in which we are stained, or we stain things in the world based on our mistakes and things like that, and we need to suffer some degree of remorse and even shame sometimes. But the truly liberating experience for Virgo is to go through a process, an initiation of the loss of innocence and the experience of grace that comes in and restores us to innocence. We basically learn that innocence is something that we are, not something that we have or lose or get. So those are like deep Virgoan experiences on the light and dark side. The dark side of Virgo, the judgment and the fall and the sense of failure and of having things stripped or taken from us. There's often, in fact, there's a lot of like agricultural myths. Who am I thinking of? Oh gosh, Demeter. Is it Demeter? Persephone? Demeter? Does that sound right? Yeah, I think it is. Where the underworld comes up as the figure of rape, of taking something from us. Now that's extreme, right? Like and that can be a really, for many people that image is not a very helpful one to like invoke, obviously. But on a metaphorical level, I think we can understand that there is a way in which things are taken from us forcefully in life. And sometimes we take it from ourselves through our own actions. And sometimes it's taken from us by outer forces. But those forces are inevitable. That's the inevitable decline of light in the day. The light is taken from us. Our bodies will be taken from us. Virgo has to go through that experience and face the anxiety of that loss and of that shame or that sin or having missed the mark or whatever the case might be, only to really, again, recognize at the end of the day that who I am and what I am is pure. I can't have it and lose it. I am it. I am that thing. So these are all, again, sort of sacred facets of the psychological journey of Virgo. Now, Mercury presides over that. Again, why? Because Mercury, as the psychopomp, is the one who leads the transitional spaces from light into darkness. This is why, for example, Mercury goes from light as the evening star and then into darkness, emerges and appears as light in the morning star and then goes into darkness. And so the 2 times of year where light hands over to darkness, where you've got light and then you go into the darkness, into the uncertainty, and you're guided through it in a meaningful way, those are Mercury's times. Now, Gemini is fascinating as well. You can go do like a whole thing on Gemini as well, but I'll leave it here for now. And remember that somewhere there's 2 extremes that we tend to get into spiritually that Virgo can teach us about. One extreme is saying, I'm pure, so I'm not going to let any form of judgment, criticism, or evaluation come into my life because, I am that I am. I'm a part of the divine, and I've got my like divine unicorn power up t-shirt on, right? It's like, don't tell me that I'm not right. So we get really, sometimes we think I'm pure as I am, and so any kind of criticism of myself, any kind of negativity in the world around me, any kind of feedback at all that is difficult or that would take away this feeling that everything is blessed and sacred and pure and perfect, that's actually that experience itself is not very flexible, right? It can become very rigid and it can be a very defended position. So be careful if you're defending purity, right? Because in a sense, the symptom of purity is that it's undefended. Now, on the other hand, there's some way in which, so we have to introduce some level of criticism. We have to be able to feel shame. I don't mean to feel ashamed about who we are, but of our behavior. And it's like there's a healthy version of shame out there somewhere, like the dog eats something it shouldn't or whatever and puts its tail between its legs. Like we should have a natural instinctual reaction to feel bad and to recognize and feel sort of ashamed for our behavior when it's bad, when it's off center. That doesn't mean that we feel ashamed about who we are, right? So there's a difference between, taking accountability for our actions and having some degree of remorse and self-criticism, and then thinking I'm bad, right? For example, I'll just give you a small example. When my phone went off, immediately I was like, I was so embarrassed. And I was like, that's so stupid, and I should stop this thing and do it all over again. It's a stupid example because it's really, a meaningless example. But instantly, what has my yoga practice taught me over time? I guess it's like in small moments like that to just be like, I'm human. I just have to remember to turn off my phone, right? And then you just keep going. So there's like an appropriate response. Like we can receive feedback from the world or the environment around us, take it in, don't feel threatened by it, and but also take it seriously and know that it's okay to be wrong and it's okay to make adjustments. Sometimes before we can get into this place, and it really happens, like we really make this progress in small things, which is why I use the stupid cell phone example, because it's the small places where we work on this stuff. It's usually not the big stuff. Like people who listen to this and they're like, okay, great. Thank God I'm not a whore. I'm going to go write a big Facebook post about it. I listened to this astrologer today and I realized I'm not a whore or something, like, what I mean? Like, it's not like usually we don't make such big leaps. You know what I mean? Like it takes time to really work out the deepest judgments we have about ourselves. We can't recover from until we've worked on in the small cracks of life typically. But anyway, the sense of being able to move in stride, maintaining a sense of innocence and purity and openness, while also paying attention to our actions and the kind of karmic reactions that come from them. That's the sweet spot for Virgo. So that's what I would, that's what I recommend, how I recommend holding it. You can always tell that we are spiritually, like we're spiritually hamstrung, right? When our 2 extremes are either I'm worthless, I think of myself that way, or I think of myself as perfect, sacred. I don't want to hear any negativity whatsoever. if you find yourself in either extreme, being like, you know what, like I read, I don't know what, I read an Eckhart Tolle book and I realized that I'm only ever here now, and so I'm perfect. And if anyone, and I'm a part of God, and so, you know, if anyone ever says anything negative about me or anything, then I block it out. And I say no, because I'm just in the now. That's called a defense mechanism. Because unless you've really realized that, you know, if you're having a reaction to the world like that, if you're having a reaction to yourself where you have to be so vigilant about your spiritual centeredness, it's a symptom of someone who's not really centered, right? We all know that too. So anyway, watch for those extremes with Virgo. The extreme of I'm very pure, or I'm very broken and fallen, or things are, you know, potentially very much in order or very much in disorder. There is a sacred sense of perfect meaning, perfect order, perfect beauty in the chaos that we experience. And there's also, you know, and vice versa too, right? In when we're in the chaos and we're all confused, we're all messed up by it, there is a sense in which, you know, or excuse me, the other way around, when we think everything's in order, right, and everything, we've got everything together, all of our T's are crossed and I's are dotted and all of that, there's also a sense in which implicit, the seed inside of all of that is disorder. The I Ching teaches us this, that right when you're finished with something, that's when, and it's all complete, that's when the very beginning seeds of disintegration and chaos begin. So we have to hold that tension. And I don't know of a better way to hold it personally than of having, you know, spiritual streams of information flowing into your ears every day. So that for me, that's music. That's going to be, you know, my favorite teachers and teachings. That's going to be sacred sound, mantra. It's going to be time out for thoughtfulness and mindfulness to reflect inwardly. We need to be able to hear the sounds of our own mind thoughtfully, slowly processing information around us. Most of the time, we don't give ourselves the opportunity to do that. And because we don't give ourselves the opportunity to do that, the way that we have of responding to mental chaos is with memes. It's like short, soundbite, snippety answers that like intellectually make sense and like click and somehow turn a little latch and like, okay, now I've just got that one figured out because I got this little saying. That usually that doesn't do it if we haven't really sat down and listened. You know, how much do you like it when you're out for coffee or something with a friend and you're sitting there talking and you can tell that the person, right as soon as they respond, has responded from some kind of script. Oh, well, don't you know that, you know, just be here now, right? It's like, how annoying is that when you're like, well, I am here now, I'm talking to you, but apparently you just want me to, like, I don't know, camp out in Eckhart Tolle's book. No offense, I don't mean to rip on Eckhart Tolle. Is it Tolle? Tolle? Whatever. So, but you get the idea. It's like you want someone to be really present for you. So similarly, the sacred anxiety, we have to hold space for it. So maybe a good question. Sorry, I'm not used to my new camera view, so hi. But how do we make space for that anxiety? How do we give it space? How do we give it context? When we give that, those sacred worries about the future, a good space to be heard and listened to, the innocence is restored. It's just like, okay, I don't know. You know, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I'm good enough. Of just living in the I don't know and being able to just sit in the worry, we come back to the innocence of the one who's experiencing the worry is innocent, right? So it's hard to come back to that unless we create space for it. Okay, that's what I've got. I hope that you guys are doing well. What do you think? You guys tell me. Do you like this camera view? Hi. Or I have it off to the side too. It's kind of interesting over there. That's kind of like my old office, but it's to the other side. I don't know. I'm still deciding. I don't have much flexibility in this space in terms of what my setup is for the next the 8-9 months, I think our lease is. We're trying to find like our forever home. So, but I did luck out with a blue wall, which is pretty cool. Anyway, sorry to be rambling on. I want to remind you all that my new course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, is coming up starting November 14th on Saturdays. It's a 1-year course in ancient Hellenistic astrology. It meets 30 times on the year. It's 2 to 3 hours long each time. All the classes are recorded if you can't make it live. There's also 12 guest lectures in addition to the 30 classes, so it's a ton of really great content. The last third of the class, we have live clients in, so you get a practicum experience where you get to see the theory, you know, put into action. If that is interesting to you, check out my website, nightlightastrology.com, the courses page. Remember that I have need-based tuition for anyone who's in need. The early bird discount is now in effect, so you can use that if you want. And then for people who are struggling due to COVID-19, we do have a we are allowing people to use need-based tuition if that's you. There's some scholarships that we're working on. I'm not sure if we're going to have it because I moved. It's a little bit of divine chaos in my own life on the cusp of Virgo season. So I'm going to try to get some of the new scholarships done that I had mentioned earlier in the summer diversity scholarship that we're offering. Worst case scenario, if I'm not able to shape it and finish it, it'll be offered next spring in 2021. But more on that soon. All right, I hope you guys are having a great week, and stay tuned. We're going to talk about Mercury rising and Mercury appearing and what that means, as well as doing a little profile on Mercury and Virgo. Okay, take it easy, everyone. Bye.